I think that Alex just called me fat. Well, I will have you know that I have recently dropped from morbidly obese to still morbidly obese. So there's that. By the way, I think the term morbid obesity is a little weird. I think we ought to just reserve it for overweight zombies. Anyway, childhood obesity as abuse. I had sort of an initial emotional gut reaction of anger and irritation to that premise. I think part of that comes from just looking at my own personal experience, that if someone had come and taken me away from my family and my parents and put me in foster care, I think objectively I would probably be worse off than I am now. I could be wrong. It could be that foster cares are amazingly complex facilities that get people great education and push them to be the best that they can be. But I think I would probably take obesity over what it appears the state of foster care, at least in the U.S., is. I was looking very briefly at kind of studies as to whether or not obesity should be classified as child abuse. And I think the definition comes down to it really being whether the treatment by the parent is considered to be causing imminent danger or harm. And the term imminent is really hard to put out there. Because realistically, if you're fat for a year, the likelihood of severe complications due to that, is there, but it's not hugely significant. And if you were going to try and say that things like that constitute abuse, I think you also have to say that not reading your kids a bedtime story also has to constitute abuse, or not setting up an arranged marriage also has to constitute abuse, because those who remain single are far more likely to have a much shorter lifespan. So I think based on the fact that I'm single, I should be suing my parents, apparently. I have a non-traditional opinion, I think, to a lot of this stuff. Alex mentioned vaccination. I think the vaccination is a really tricky topic, because absolutely I agree that you should vaccinate your kids. Please vaccinate your kids, and I think that we need to appeal to people to vaccinate their kids. And I think that the failure to vaccinate your kids comes from very poor understanding and bad judgment. But with that said, I also think that if you truly believe that if you vaccinate your kid, you will cause autism, and you truly believe that having autism is worse than than contracting these diseases, if you in your own head have weighed out these things, I think you have a responsibility not to vaccinate your kids. I think your evaluation is wrong, but I think that if we take this into the realm of hyperbole, and we say that some sleazy person, kind of walking down a dark alley, comes at you and is like, "Hey, I got this drug, and if you don't give your kid this drug, he's gonna get green boils all over his face." It would be irresponsible for you to just inject your kid right there. We base this stuff off of the trust that we have in the medical community, and some people don't have that trust. And I think that we have to accept that our assumption that vaccines are essentially or largely harmless is based on a set of assumptions that many of us hold that others may not. And I think really what we ought to be focusing on is branding vaccines and educating people about vaccines, rather than trying to shame people based on kind of their moral decisions. Because I think if it is the case that you truly believe that what you're doing will cause harm to the kid that is more significant than the harm that you're avoiding by giving them the shot, then it is irresponsible. In the same way, I think when we talk about obesity, we have to be aware that we're making some weird assumptions. Alex pointed out that the situation that many parents find themselves in is not one that is conducive to feeding their kids healthy food. It's also the case that sedentary lifestyle, the increase of video games, and the increased disdain for the outside, which are great things, has made the role of parents in trying to maintain their kids' health very challenging. And I think it's hard to necessarily point fingers. Saying that all of a sudden this is a crisis and it's just because these parents have screwed up. It's also a big question to me that one of the idea of government intervention over childhood obesity is somewhat laughable to me, because at least in the U.S., I grew up in a time when the food pyramid recommended that the majority of what you eat should be starch. And strangely enough, if I restrict myself to a diet of French fries, I don't seem to get any healthier. Now there are a lot of reasons for kind of the government's stuff and subsidizing of agribusiness and all junk that I don't want to necessarily get into. But I think the idea that the government can necessarily do a better job has to be kind of called into question when we look at the way that they've treated health in the past. So I think, in closing, so I don't go on too long, when we look at things like childhood obesity and we look at imminent harm, we look at whether or not to relinquish kids to foster care, we have to consider what is the, we can't treat that single condition on its own. We have to consider, what are the additional harms that are associated with foster care. Is the government better prepared to provide good nutrition for kids? Even looking at the school lunch program, it seems to be a little dubious. And so the idea of calling parents out and saying that the state now has the authority in managing children becomes very difficult, because I don't think that the state has a record superior to the average parent. And just finally, I already said in closing, but finally, obesity is weird, and it is life-threatening, and it is quality of life issue. But I think we make a big mistake when we classify, when we move toward classifying these things as abuse. The decision for me to feed me more than I need, or to allow me to feed myself more than I need, is not the same as physical, sexual, or emotional abuse. And I think that we need to be clear about delineating what those things are, because it's body positivity is another whole thing. I think it's particularly weird that we talk about the need to, if we're talking about childhood obesity, we also are creating a very strong cultural norm for obesity, which I think kind of cuts two ways. On the one hand, if someone is suffering from obesity, then yes, we should do everything that we can to mitigate the additional side effects of emotional trauma and bullying and etc. But at the same time, when we create a cultural norm for obesity, it makes it easier for us to become obese, which is itself a harmful thing. So I think when we talk about the kind of social justice gone wild gets a bit crazy, and I think we need to be very careful about recognizing that obesity is a health problem. Speaking just for obesity, that is a health problem. If you're supposed to be higher than your BMI, because BMI is a terrible metric, great. But if we're talking about people who have health risks related to their body size, I think it's potentially harmful to try and normalize that behavior. We need to be very clear about saying, this is not something that we support or recommend, but at the same time we also feel that these additional negative consequences of emotional abuse from people and discrimination and bullying are things that we absolutely deplore, and that despite the fact that you are suffering from this physical condition, that we kind of distance those two things. I think right now, in a lot of the real world, we tend to favor just kind of being angry at fat people, and in a lot of Tumblr, we try and lean more toward being incredibly accepting and saying, be 800 pounds. Well, I don't think that's the sort of thing that we should encourage if it's not physically healthy, but at the same time, we need to be clear about kind of distinguishing between those 2 points. So that is what I have to say, and I hope that everyone is doing well, and